Well, welcome to the 700 Club, replacing millions of jobs, erasing key events from history, and jeopardizing national security. These are just a few of the dangers of artificial intelligence.
The threats are so ominous that one AI CEO is calling for government regulations. He warns that artificial intelligence could cause, quote, significant harm to the world. David Brody reports.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world.
A surprise call for action from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, clarifying the dangers of tomorrow posed by the rapidly evolving technology of artificial intelligence. Altman wants lawmakers to step in and regulate it before it's too late, even calling for a government agency to oversee the industry.
I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong. And we want to be vocal about that.
It's been less than a year since ChatGPT was released to the world, and AI technology can already do so much more. From speech writing and tutoring to machine learning, it can create new content such as music and art. It can even create deepfake video and audio. Senator Richard Blumenthal opening the hearing with a ChatGPT-generated greeting and audio app that impersonated his voice based on Senate floor speeches.
Too often, we have seen what happens when technology outpaces regulation.
If you were listening from home, you might have thought that voice was mine and the words from me. But in fact, that voice was not mine.
So it's very important that we just take it a step at a time and develop it slowly so it doesn't ruin our lives as far as human life is concerned.
As lawmakers scramble to regulate AI technology, tech expert Burton Kelso tells CBN News that protecting yourself from this technology starts with protecting personal information.
So the thing that we have to worry about as individuals is making sure that we're not putting personal information in AI, because at any point, either through a supply chain hack or just a hack with OpenAI itself, then that information can be exposed to the dark web.
Some major fears include AI replacing millions of jobs. It could even falsify information for malicious gain or be used to erase key moments from history. However, one of the biggest concerns deals with national security.
Given that we're going to face an election next year and these models are getting better, I think this is a significant area of concern.
Rapid advances in AI tech are complicating efforts here and abroad to agree on laws that govern emerging technologies. China has already drafted regulations that could shape the future.
But at the same time, a lot of technology comes out of China. And I think one of the things that we want to prevent as a country is that China rules everything.
This is a remarkable time to be working on artificial intelligence. But as this technology advances, we understand that people are anxious about how it could change the way we live.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
Well, it may be too late for regulations. Large language models, which is what most of this current AI is already available, so you can download it to your own PC, your own laptop, and then you can train it on a data set that you just have there. It doesn't even need access to the internet anymore. So how do you regulate that, and how do you get these things in place? Are we moving as fast as the technology is moving? And I think the answer is clearly no. We haven't even gotten to regulations on what data is protected to you. Europe has that, China has that, and their laws are far more advanced than what we have in the United States to protect our citizens. Do you have the right to disappear from the internet? Do you have a right to your own image? Do you have a right to your name, your likeness, what you've written, what you've done, your search terms, your search queries? All of those things, we have all been monetized by corporations where we're their product. And they use that in order to sell us goods, in order to shape our opinions, to give us particular news stories in our feeds. All of these things are already happening, and we're frankly turning a blind eye to it. The other problem is I don't see the Republicans and Democrats getting together on this issue, but I think for everyone's sake, for the sake of the human race, we need to. In other news, the White House and lawmakers continue to negotiate a deal to avert a financial disaster. Both sides are now reporting signs of progress. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. President Biden is in Japan today, meeting with the nation's prime minister ahead of the G7 summit, which starts Friday. Before leaving the United States, the president repeated the message that he's confident the U.S. will reach a deal to raise the ceiling on the debt limit. Republicans are pressing for measures to spur the economy and cut down on the debt. One contentious issue is expanded work requirements for welfare programs.
I'm not going to accept any work requirements that's going to impact on medical health needs of people. I'm not going to accept any work requirements that go much beyond what is already. Well, I voted years ago for the work requirements that exist, but it's possible there could be a few others, but not anything of any consequence.
On CBN's Faith Nation, Stephen Moore, chairman of FreedomWorks Task Force on Economic Revival, said the growing national debt is the greatest threat to America's future.
We have a $31 trillion national debt. As you just heard, our debt is bigger than our economy. That's a really scary number, and it's headed to 50 trillion. So the economic crisis we're facing is not that we might not pass the debt ceiling on time. It's that we continue on this path to financial ruin.
President Biden returns to Washington Sunday to continue negotiations. Well, the fate of the abortion pill mifepristone is once again in the hands of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. A three-judge panel heard arguments Wednesday over whether FDA approval of the drug should be revoked more than 20 years after it was granted. The case is likely to end up back at the Supreme Court, which has already intervened to keep the drug available while the legal fight winds its way through the courts. That decision came after a Texas-based judge revoked the drug's approval. Well, now to a disturbing trend among young people in America. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, kids and young adults are dying at the highest levels in almost 15 years. The report cites analysis of CDC statistics by Stephen Wolf of the Center on Society and Health at the Virginia Commonwealth University. From 2019 to 2020, the mortality rate for people between the ages of 1 and 19 increased by more than 10.5%. The next year, it jumped another 8.3%. Most of the increase happened to those aged 10 to 19. The major causes of death were homicide, suicide, car accidents, and drug overdoses. The increases are linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers say lockdowns and school closures fueled anxiety and depression. They also cite the easy availability of guns, dangerous driving, and the emergence of the deadly drugs like fentanyl. Well, the fallout from COVID is also having a huge impact on faith in America. Troubling new statistics show significant changes in people's views about God and their commitment to spiritual growth. CBN's Billy Hallowell explores how the pandemic fueled these sobering shifts.
A new survey reveals the stunning impact COVID-19 had on Americans' religious perspectives. The percentage with a biblical worldview has plummeted to just 4%. Dr. George Barna, director of the Cultural Research Center, finds the results of the American Worldview Inventory report alarming.
First of all, much more extensive than we actually expected. Typically, you don't find that religious beliefs change very much. They're probably the most stable of the factors in a person's life because they relate to worldview that's formed when you're young and it doesn't change much as you age.
Dr. Barna adds that crisis moments like the pandemic can also spark surprising shifts.
We found a number of things that changed in terms of their views of truth, their views about God, their own assessment of their spiritual commitment, some of their moral perspectives, going to church, reading the Bible, acknowledging their sins and asking for forgiveness. Those kinds of things all shifted pretty dramatically.
And the changes aren't limited to the secular world. Only 44% of born-again Christians believe Jesus didn't commit any sins during his life on earth, down from 58% in 2020. And the percentage of those who see a God-given calling or purpose for their lives declined by almost half, from 88% to 46%.
We've really got to sit back and think intelligently and strategically about what are we doing in reference to worldview. As we look at that, what we find is parents are doing next to nothing intentionally. Churches are doing next to nothing intentionally. And so what's happening is that every child is out there as a free moral agent trying to figure out the world. And I say child because a person's worldview is almost fully formed by the age of 13. So it's really with children that we have to focus on what are we going to do to develop that worldview.
Digital evangelist Matt Brown, founder of Think Eternity, agrees.
We need to do the things that Jesus told us to do now more than ever, because there's just never been a time that's more important that we preach the gospel, that we share the message of Jesus with the people around us, that we disciple the next generation. It's so important that we give the next generation a biblical worldview.
Dr. Barna believes church closures during the pandemic and other policies left people shaken up and confused. Still, despite the dire numbers, hope remains.
I think we've still got a little bit of a window of opportunity here where people are trying to figure some things out. This would be a great time for disciple makers to say, you know what? I'm going to start speaking to these issues that are on the minds and hearts of people today. I'm not going to go into esoteric theological conversations. I've got to deal with what people are really wrestling with.
And while the situation might seem sobering or even insurmountable, Brown says starting small and clinging to truth can make all the difference. Billy Hollowell, CBN News.
Thanks, Billy. Gordon, back to you.
Now, the number one thing I recommend to all Christians, please read the Bible, and please read it every day. Try to get your thinking in alignment with what the Bible says. If you're sort of new to this, you can obviously start with the 4 Gospels. I encourage all Christians everywhere to read the book of Romans, and if you can sort of stomach it, try to get it in the original Greek. There are plenty of interlineal Bibles where you don't have to know Greek, you don't even have to understand it, where you can sort of read along and see transliterations and then have a Greek dictionary that'll give you more insight into it. That was the call of the Renaissance, where let's go back to the original sources. Let's not put so much effort on the Latin translation of the Bible. Well, let's go back to the Greek, let's go back to the Hebrew, let's go back to the original sources, what was written down by the apostles. And when you do that, it's transforming. You now have your doctrine secure. You now are adhering to the teachings of the apostles, which used to be the standard for any minister that you had to pledge. I adhere to the teachings of the apostles. I know them. I have been instructed in them. And when you do that, when you have that, it's absolutely wonderful. And what happens in the world, you now understand, well, that is the way of this cosmos. That's the way of this world, and that world is subject to the power of the prince of the air. And we need to countermand that with the power of the Prince of Peace. You can only have that when you have Scripture memorized deep within you. How did Jesus overcome the devil? Well, he just quoted from the book of Deuteronomy. He quoted the sermon of Moses to the people of Israel. We can do the same thing, and we can have the same victory.